Hello and welcome. Today we delve into a turning point in World War II that could have changed everything, yet almost did not. On December 22nd, 1944, in the frozen plains of Bastogne, a small town in Belgium, four German officers carried a message with a white flag, demanding surrender from roughly 18,000 American soldiers encircled by 30,000 German troops, backed by hundreds of tanks and a brutal winter that froze supplies in hopes alike. But what if those Germans believed victory was already in their grasp? Did their smug confidence mask an overreach that would soon backfire spectacularly? How did a secret, lightning-fast German assault in the Ardennes, unleashed just 6 days earlier, threaten to crush the entire Allied front? Could an untested American division, exhausted and under-equipped, stand against such overwhelming odds? And most astonishingly, how did one man, General George S. Patton, refused to accept defeat, promising to break through icy hell to save the day? As the chaos of the initial attack faded, the fate of millions hung on a razor's edge, with the entire course of history teetering on the brink of a different outcome. In this story of daring, deception, and defiance, we will peel back the layers of a conflict that seemed lost, until a bold gamble, an audacious leader, and a twist of fate began to turn the tide. The question remains, what secrets lie beneath the snow-covered fields of Bastogne? And how did a desperate stand there become a legendary turning point? Join us as we uncover the truth behind one of the most dramatic episodes of the Second World War, starting right now. On December 22nd of the year 1944, at precisely 11:30 in the morning, in the frozen plains of Bastogne, Belgium, a chilling scene was unfolding that would forever be etched into the annals of history. Lieutenant Colonel Harry Card, standing amid the bleak, snow-covered landscape, where warmth and life seemed to have been drained by the relentless cold, watched intently as four German officers advanced through the winter's white silence. Their uniforms stood out vividly against the desolate, snow-laden backdrop, and they carried with them a conspicuous white flag, an unmistakable sign of surrender or negotiation amidst the devastation surrounding them. These officers were bringing a message that was destined to ripple through history, a demand for the surrender of the beleaguered town, presented with a tone tinged heavily with smug confidence, as if victory was already assured, and the ultimate triumph was imminent. Yet amid this tense moment, there was a silent and ominous shift occurring in the broader scope of the unfolding conflict. The very tide of war was starting to turn against the Germans. Painful and stark, the reality was that, at this moment, the American forces stationed in and near Bastogne found themselves completely encircled by formidable German armored units. The situation was dire. Only one semblance of hope remained, an option that was harshly cloaked in the shadows of shame and dignity alike: the voluntary surrender of the entire encircled town in hopes of avoiding outright annihilation. With deliberate airs of supreme confidence, the German officers waited, unshakable, experienced, and certain. They had justified reason for their arrogance, for they had managed to trap roughly 18,000 American soldiers within the city walls, surrounded on all sides by an overwhelming force of approximately 30,000 Germans, heavily reinforced with hundreds of tanks that cast long, fearsome shadows over the snow. Adding to the grim brightness of the situation was the absence of supplies, a critical shortage that deepened the desperation. Not a single supply convoy had been able to break through the snow and frozen air, thwarted by the brutal winter weather that grounded all Allied aircraft and rendered the skies completely useless for aid or reinforcement. Further exacerbating the tragic plight of the encircled Western Allies was the distance, over 100 miles to the south, where General George S. Patton, the renowned American military leader, had just pledged a promise so daring that even his peers in the military hierarchy styled it as nearly unbelievable. General Patton's vow was to mobilize an entire army and push forward through the hellish winter terrain at a breakneck pace, faster than any military campaign in history up to that point, no matter how extreme or arduous the conditions. Meanwhile, what seemed an insurmountable challenge was rapidly becoming a remarkable story of chance and choices, where the classic battle scenarios of superiority in numbers and superior technology would suddenly pale in comparison to raw ingenuity, audacity, and resolute American willpower. The confrontation was poised to shift drastically, driven not only by cold calculus but also by an unexpected collision of overconfidence among the Germans with an unyielding determination among the Americans. At the heart of this astonishing turn of events was a singular, audacious individual, General George S. Patton, who simply would not accept that victory was impossible. His unshakable belief in ascending beyond limitations set by the terrain, the weather, and the chaos of war was about to rewrite the rules of military mathematics. This remarkable transformation had begun exactly 6 days earlier, in the pre-dawn hours of December 16, 1944, sealing its importance in history right from its onset. Just after 5:30 in the morning, the tranquility of the Ardennes forest shattered in a crescendo of violence. A brutal assault that was unparalleled on the Western Front since the throes of 1940. Simultaneous with the rising violence of artillery, the peaceful darkness was suddenly splintered by the lethal fury of music makings, as which 1,600 German artillery pieces unleashed a relentless barrage along an incredible and strategically vital 80-mile stretch of the Allied front. The attack was characterized by deafening shells ripping through the frigid air, each exploding with venomous energy toward American positions that were initially unprepared for such ferocity. For one young soldier, Private First Class Robert Leckie of the 99th Infantry Division, the horrifying spectacle was indelibly recorded in his own words. Words that would later breathe life into the silent diaries of history. He wrote of how the earth beneath their feet trembled violently, trees being sent flying into splinters by the shattering impact, and the very air itself seemingly shrieking in pain from the relentless assault. The soldiers had been reassured that the Germans had been exhausted and defeated, but this attack, known unmistakably as Operation Wacht am Rhein, an utmost secret effort to strike from the Rhine River, Hitler's last desperate gambit, spelled the beginning of a brutal and ferocious new phase of the conflict. In complete secrecy, the aftermath of earlier battles found many soldiers in a state of exhaustion or still recovering from recent engagements. The Germans, meanwhile, managed to achieve complete tactical surprise, striking swiftly and unexpectedly. In the space of only a few hours, entire American units found themselves overwhelmed, either being overrun outright or retreating in disorganized chaos. The success of this rapid strike, however, depended critically on one key factor: speed. The Germans' plan required them to seize a strategically vital road junction at Bastogne within a strict time frame of 48 hours. Bastogne was the linchpin of their offensive, as it was the point where 7 major roads intersected. These roads were essential arteries for the advancing German tanks and mechanized units, as they led directly toward their ultimate objective, the port city of Antwerp, situated approximately 125 miles distant. Securing Bastogne was not simply a matter of tactical advantage. Without its capture, the entire German offensive stood on the brink of stalling, jeopardizing their hopes of advancing further eastward. At the forefront of the effort to seize Bastogne was General de Panzertruppen Heinrich Freiherr von Lettwitz, who commanded the formidable 47th Panzer Corps. His force was a battle-hardened and well-equipped formation, featuring the renowned 2nd Panzer Division, which boasted 88 tanks and assault guns, collectively comprising some of the most elite armored units in the German army. Alongside them was the veteran Panzerleid Division, equipped with 57 tanks, demonstrating their significant armored strength, complemented by the 26th Volksgrenadier Division, a considerable force numbering 17,000 infantrymen. Their marching force was poised to push swiftly toward Bastogne from the south. Simultaneously, an opposing force was racing toward the same crucial target from the opposite direction. The 51st Airborne Division, famously known as the Screaming Eagles. These highly trained soldiers had been resting in Reims, France, recovering from an intensive 72-day combat tour in Holland, when they received the desperate call to move. Their supplies were limited. They had no winter clothing on hand, and there was no time for extensive preparations, only immediate mobilization. They needed to pick up their weapons, gear, and supplies, then pile into trucks headed towards Bastogne, driven by a sense of mounting urgency. On the night of December 17th, precisely at 9 o'clock in the evening, the first trucks left their staging area, heading into the freezing darkness to reach their objective. The temperature had plummeted to 14 degrees Fahrenheit, adding to the harrowing conditions the soldiers endured. Among those firm in his memory was Private Donald Burgett, a member of the 56th Parachute Infantry Regiment, who vividly recalled the journey as one of the most intense and tense experiences of his military service. As their convoy advanced, Burgett observed the bleak landscape and the alarming sight of countless columns of American troops retreating in the opposite direction. Many of these soldiers had surrendered their weapons, while others had no helmets. They were abandoning the fight in fear and disarray. Some mottled faces shouted desperate warnings in the darkness, cries echoing through the cold air. "Go back! Go back! They'll kill you all!" Shoo! Burgett remembered one soldier whose eyes were wide with terror, who suddenly seized his arm and vehemently warned him, "There are thousands of them. Tigers, panthers, all kinds of tanks." In response, Burgett pushed him aside, unwavering in his resolve. There was no thought of retreat. They had an imminent mission to accomplish. The convoy stretched endlessly across the landscape, with thousands of trucks, numbering in the hundreds, threading through the night in a long, unwieldy procession. They had scant knowledge of what awaited them at Bastogne. Maps to guide them were limited. Intelligence reports proved contradictory and often ominous, but they understood that their success or failure would pivot on their ability to reach Roubaix in time. The American division assembling before Bastogne numbered approximately 85 officers partnered with 11,035 enlisted men, amounting to in all a total of somewhere around 11,840 combat-ready personnel. Within this formidable force were 4 infantry regiments, the 5,001st, 5,002nd, and the 61st Parachute Infantry Regiments, as well as the 327th Glider Infantry Regiment. These units were bolstered by 4 artillery battalions and a variety of supporting elements necessary to sustain their fighting capability through the difficult operation. By the time the leading elements of the 5,001st Pier reached Bastogne, shortly after 11:30 on the night of December 18th, they had beaten the Germans to the objective by just a few critical hours, establishing early control ahead of the main enemy forces. Meanwhile, the German assault was already underway further north. A combat team from the 10th Armored Division, known as Team de Suber and commanded by Major William de Subry, had made an important strategic move by setting up a roadblock. In the tense and desperate days of the battle for Nouville, the defenders found themselves compelled to bring the enemy remarkably close, to the brink of danger in order to strike from an unexpected flank. This strategy involved a risky proximity, exposing their own units to imminent threat. Yet it was necessary for gaining a tactical advantage. The fierce confrontation for Nouville persisted relentlessly throughout an entire day, with each side desperate to outmaneuver the other and secure their respective positions amidst the chaos of wartime combat. The true story of the defense involves a small but remarkably courageous force known as Team de Serre, consisting of only 15 Sherman tanks. Despite being vastly outnumbered, they faced the formidable 2nd Panzer Division head-on, embodying a stubborn resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. Over a grueling 48 hours, this diminutive tank unit managed to inflict heavy losses on the enemy, destroying a total of 31 German tanks, and all this while under relentless attack and extreme pressure. Their resilience delayed the German advance significantly, a delay that ultimately proved crucial. Their commanding officer, Major Desry, sustained grievous injuries when a German shell penetrated his command post, wounding him severely. Yet in doing so, he bought invaluable time for the beleaguered defenders. Late in the year, as December 20th arrived like a grim shadow over the battlefield, a pivotal change occurred in Bastogne's command structure. A new leader, Brigadier General Anthony Clement McAuliffe, was appointed to assume temporary command of the emblematic 101st Airborne Division, which was operating in the region, while Senior Commander Maxwell Taylor was dispatched to Washington. McAuliffe was recognized as an artillery officer with a notable reputation, particularly known for his unshakable calm composure amid the chaos of warfare. Such calm would soon be put to the ultimate test, as the intensity of the encirclement threatened to crush all resistance. Inside his command headquarters, McAuliffe examined the situation map, which laid bare a bleak and perilous reality. German forces braced to envelop Bastogne from 3 separate directions, knocking on their door with relentless pressure. From the south and east, The formidable 26th Folk Grenadier Division was waging an infiltration campaign, creeping closer under cover of darkness and fog. Simultaneously, the Panzer Division was pushing forward from the east, threatening to cut off the remaining routes into the town. Meanwhile, elements of the 2nd Panzer Division advanced determinedly from the north, aiming to flank and encircle the defenders entirely. By midday on the 20th of December, the situation had deteriorated further. The last accessible road into Bastogne, a vital highway leading directly to Neufchâteau, had been severed. Doing their best to hold a line in the face of encroaching chaos, Captain Richard Winters of Easy Company, within the 506th Infantry Regiment, meticulously positioned his troops in foxholes along the perimeter of the town's defenses. As night settled in, distant sounds of German tanks rumbled through the darkness beyond their position, heightening the sense of imminent danger. The soldiers hurriedly dug their foxholes deeper, improvising with helmets and bare hands as their entrenching tools crumbled into the frozen ground. The temperature plummeted near 0 degrees Fahrenheit, dangerously cold, and frostbite plagued their exhausted feet, with some already turning black from the freezing conditions. A stark reminder of the brutal physical toll of the siege. Inside Bastogne, the civilian population, approximately 3,000 people, sought sanctuary in the many cellar shelters within their damaged town. These civilians huddled in darkness as German artillery began its systematic bombardment, leveling the town and unleashing destruction from afar. Among those providing aid was Renée Lamer, a dedicated 30-year-old Belgian nurse. She tirelessly worked in the aid station situated in Neufchâteau, tending to the wounded of both American soldiers and German prisoners alike. Her selfless care earned her respect, but also foreshadowed her tragic end, as she would not survive the escalating suffering and bombardment of the siege. The number of defenders in Bastogne now sharply increased to roughly 18,000 men, comprised of various units and formations. The 101st Airborne Division contributed 11,840 men, determined to hold the town at all costs. Also present was Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division, commanded by Colonel William Roberts, which had around 40 operational tanks and approximately 2,800 soldiers. Alongside these were units including the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion, armed with M18 Hellcats, the All-African American 969th Artillery Battalion, and a diverse array of artillery and support units. As dawn broke on December 21st, visibility shrank to fewer than 100 yards, shrouding the battlefield in ever-dense fog mixed with falling snow, creating an eerie white curtain that hampered movement and cordoned off critical parts of the terrain. The United States Army's meteorological reports describe these conditions as extremely. On those treacherously icy roads, soldiers faced the harshest reality of war, men suffering from wounds that, before aid could arrive, led them to freeze to death in the unforgiving cold. The chaos of battle left many so gravely injured that hope for survival seemed astronomically thin, especially as medical supplies rapidly dwindled. Inside the fortified perimeter of Bastogne, the dire scarcity of ammunition became an ominous threat. The artillery reserves had been rationed drastically, only 10 rounds per gun each day, a meager amount considering the relentless onslaught faced. The situation within the medical supply chains was equally desperate, having been flattened following the loss of the medical company on December the 19th. Morphine, a critical analgesic needed for the most severe injuries, was carefully reserved, rationed to avoid exhaustion, its presence barely sufficient to ease the agony of the worst casualties. Meanwhile, food supplies had become so limited that the soldiers were largely reduced to subsisting on a single meager meal per day. These rationing efforts underscored the severity of their predicament. Private First Class James Sims of the 101st Division recounted with somber clarity the grim conditions. "We were drinking snow for water. My buddy lying next to me in the foxhole had his feet frozen to his boots. When the medic finally had to amputate them, his toes came off together with the boots. The worst part, he didn't even cry. He was beyond feeling anything at all." Such descriptions painted a stark picture of human suffering against the bitter winter. Meanwhile, approximately 130 miles south of Bastogne, at the small, damp barracks of Verdun, A very different scene was unfolding amid the same cold December day. Inside these humble walls, human strategy and decision-making were taking shape, crucial for shaping the course of the war. Supreme Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower had convened an emergency gathering of his top commanders in a single room heated somewhat vaguely by a solitary, pot-bellied stove that struggled to combat the penetrating chill. The officers present included the renowned Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, Lieutenant General Omar Bradley, and Lieutenant General George S. Patton. Each had been briefed moments earlier by Major General Kenneth Strong, Eisenhower's trusted chief of intelligence, on the latest and alarming German breakthrough. The heavy silence that fell upon the room was tangible, almost oppressive, as the gravity of the situation sank in. Then Eisenhower broke the silence, his words defining the American resolve and response to the crisis. He articulated with characteristic confidence that the current predicament should be viewed as a tremendous opportunity rather than as a catastrophic setback. His speech emphasized a positive outlook, asserting that amid such tumult, the faces gathered at the conference table should be cheerful and ever hopeful for victory. Hearing the optimism in Eisenhower's voice, Patton immediately grinned and, with obvious eagerness, blurted out, "Hell, let's have the guts to let the sons of go all the way to Paris. Then we'll really cut them off and chew them up." His words echoed a fiery ambition to press harder than ever before. Eisenhower, maintaining a more measured tone, turned toward George, most likely George Patton, and asked earnestly, "George, I need you to attack north. How quickly can you disengage from your current offensive and pivot toward Bastogne?" This was a strategic move crucial for turning the tide. The response from Patton was startling in its confidence. "I can attack with 3 divisions in 48 hours. Immediately, the room erupted with disbelief. Some officers could hardly accept such a dramatic claim. Even Air Chief Marshal Arthur Tadar, a seasoned military leader, laughed incredulously as he watched his armies attempt to move their entire corps 90 miles away in winter conditions, over icy roads in just 2 days. Such an undertaking seemed impossible. Eisenhower's face flushed with a mixture of frustration and concern. He warned Patton sternly, "Don't be fatuous, George. If you try that too early, you won't get all 3 divisions ready. You'll end up going piecemeal, and you'll be destroyed." It was a caution meant to keep Patton grounded in reality, cautioning against overconfidence or haste that could compromise the mission. Yet Patton was unbowed. He was not just boastful. His preparation and strategic planning had already taken these possibilities into account. For 3 days, his brilliant operations officer, Colonel Oscar Coe, had been giving him warnings, the clear threat posed by the German buildup in the Ardennes forest. Careful planning had gone into the pre-positioning of fuel dumps, ammunition caches, and medical units along potential routes towards Bastogne, signaling a readiness for this extremely difficult maneuver. Patton affirmed calmly, "I'm not being fatuous, Ike. I've already issued preliminary orders." He produced a map and confidently outlined his plan to Eisenhower, showing the routes. General Dwight D. Eisenhower scrutinized the map intently, his eyes charting a route across impossible terrain. The distance that needed to be covered was truly staggering, stretching well beyond everyday comprehension. To make matters worse, the weather conditions were abysmal. A relentless, biting cold combined with heavy snow was transforming the landscape into a frozen, treacherous stay. The roads, already perilous, had turned into solid sheets of ice, offering little grip and presenting a formidable obstacle for any movement. Yet amidst these seemingly insurmountable conditions, the urgent task of relieving Bastogne. When was the operation scheduled to commence? The answer was December 22nd in the early morning hours. The order was clear and direct. Initiate the operation at that precise time. Authoritative decrees were made and plans activated without delay. As General Patton exited a high-level meeting, he promptly contacted his headquarters through a secretly agreed-upon code, a short, simple phrase, "Play ball." These 2 words, carefully chosen, ignited the beginning of one of the most extraordinary strategic maneuvers in the entire history of military warfare. Within several hours, a colossal movement commenced across the icy terrain. Over 133,000 vehicles, including tanks, trucks, and supply convoys, rolled northward in a coordinated effort, unlike any before. The entire Third Army, comprising approximately 250,000 troops, needed to be repositioned and reoriented swiftly to meet the changing demands of the battlefield. Logistics and precision planning had to coalesce seamlessly. Supply depots, which had been strategically placed for an offensive aimed at penetrating deeper into Germany, now required urgent relocation. 20,000 miles of telephone wire, meticulously strung and maintained, had to be rerouted to ensure real-time communication amid the chaos. Artillery positions, carefully calculated for one tactical approach, needed to be recalculated entirely to fit the new orientation, demanding extraordinary ingenuity and speed from the artillery officers and engineers working against an unforgiving clock. One officer in particular, Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, commander of the 37th Tank Battalion within the 4th Armored Division, received his orders late in the evening on December 19th, at 7:00 p.m. precisely. His battalion was instructed to move an astonishing 150 miles through the brutal winter night amidst a blizzard that obscured vision and chilled skin deep. Abrams later recalled the harrowing journey, describing how they drove with blackout lights as darkness enveloped the landscape, making navigation a near impossible feat. Tank commanders stood vigil in their turrets, battling the freezing cold, as they guided drivers who could barely see the silent road beneath layers of snow and ice. Many men, worn out from hours of struggle, fell asleep standing rather than sitting, and had to be shakily roused back to alertness. The logistical efforts supporting this operation were mind-boggling. Each Sherman tank, the backbone of their armored force, needed approximately 175 gallons of fuel to complete just this phase of the journey. By the time they embarked onto the road, the division's fuel trucks, critical to maintaining the operation, had to deliver an estimated 50,000 gallons just to reach the commencement point. These trucks, however, encountered treacherous conditions, often sliding off icy roads into roadside ditches, halting progress and creating dangerous delays. When breakdowns occurred, fuel had to be manually transferred from one container to another, 5-gallon jerry cans being the standard, an arduous and time-consuming task. Amid this chaos, Master Sergeant Frank Carousel from the 4th Armored Maintenance Company worked tirelessly for 72 hours straight. During that punishing period, he and his team meticulously changed worn, damaged track blocks on tanks still in motion, facilitating their entry into combat positions. Men's hands, frozen and stiff with cold, sometimes tore free when pulled away from the tank's metal surface, revealing rawly exposed flesh. Nonetheless, they pressed on without hesitation, fully aware of the critical role each of them played. Their sense of duty was reinforced by the urgent knowledge that the captured paratroopers in Bastogne differentially relied on their efforts. Meanwhile, in Bastogne itself, circumstances had reached a dire tipping point, conditions approaching critical mass. The fortified perimeter had been sharply diminished to less than 16 miles, creating a precarious and shrinking bubble of safety. German artillery, having been meticulously targeted and calibrated, now zeroed in with deadly precision on every key stronghold. The life-saving aid stations, overwhelmed by flow of wounded and exhausted soldiers, were stretched to their limits, straining under the crushing weight of injuries and emergency care. On December 22nd at precisely 11:30 in the morning, an event of considerable significance unfolded. Under the white flag of truce, 4 German officers approached the battered American lines, signaling an attempt at negotiations. They were greeted by soldiers from Charlie Company of the Army's 327th Glider Infantry Regiment. The German group comprised Major Wagner from the 40. The message that crackled through in fluent German was a grim declaration, aloud for everyone in the room to hear. In those dire moments, it conveyed a sense of hopelessness faced by the American forces, warning ominously that German artillery units were fully prepared and capable of annihilating the retreating troops from the United States. The message emphasized that only surrender could spare the soldiers from complete destruction, with the ominous signal that resistance was futile against the overwhelming might of the German military. Amid this tense atmosphere, Colonel Moore sought clarity and asked what should be the official response to such a catastrophic claim. McAuliffe, a seasoned and straightforward officer, listened carefully, appearing genuinely perplexed, and responded with 2 simple words: I don't know what to say. His reluctance to reply immediately reflected the gravity of the situation, leaving the room filled with tension. Then Lieutenant Colonel Harry Card spoke up, offering some dry wit for this rallying moment, stating, "What you said first would be difficult to top, General." Aye. His words served as a subtle but pointed reassurance, hinting that the initial German threat was already extreme enough. McAuliffe, grasping the clue, chuckled and asked, half in jest, "You mean nuts?" When he uttered this slang term, it became an instant rallying cry, capturing their indomitable spirit. The room responded with broad agreement and a sense of resolve. Taking a moment to compose himself, McAuliffe then sat down and wrote what would become an immortal response, one that would echo in history and confound the German commander. Simply the word nuts. This succinct refusal carried immense symbolic meaning, a declaration that defied the Germans' expectations of capitulation. Moments later, Colonel Joseph Harper delivered their proud, resolute message to the waiting German officers, who were understandably puzzled by the curt reply. They had not anticipated such a blunt gesture, and as they repeated, "Nuts! What does this mean?" Harper, unable to suppress a wry smile, responded bluntly, "It meant, go to hell." The defiance conveyed by that single word encapsulated the American will to resist, no matter the odds. Harper didn't stop there. He issued a stern, unforgiving warning, "And I'll tell you something else. If you attack again, we will kill every goddamn German trying to breach this city." His words were deliberate and forceful, underscoring the message that any further assaults would be met with deadly resistance. Major Wagner, a German officer, stiffened at Harper's defiant tone, but countered bitterly, "We will kill many Americans. This is war." With a wry, no-nonsense tone, Harper responded, "On your way, buddy," and wished them good luck, a sardonic farewell to the retreating enemy. Later, Hasso von Manteuffel, commander of the 5th Panzer Army, admitted his surprise at the entire episode. He confided that a delegation from the Panzer Division had been sent to Bastogne, the city under siege, without his command's authorization, adding that their demand for surrender had been, as expected, refused. This act of fearless defiance by McAuliffe and his men provoked a harsh and immediate German response. The very night after the refused surrender, the Luftwaffe launched its first significant bombing raid against Bastogne, a city already torn apart by war. For the defenders hidden in their trenches and makeshift foxholes, the attack was akin to a glimpse of hell itself. Corporal Walter Gordon of Easy Company vividly described the chaos that ensued. The ground trembled as if struck by an earthquake. Trees in the city burst into uncontrollable flames, and shrapnel, flying through the air, resembled furious hornets, striking their targets. The soldiers, overwhelmed and desperately seeking survival, pressed themselves into the frozen earth, praying for their lives. The frigid temperatures plunged to nearly 10 below zero Fahrenheit, trapping men in icy holes for hours on end. To avoid freezing to death, many learned to urinate in empty ration cans, an act born out of necessity rather than choice, so they would not be forced to leave their trenches and risk sniper fire or frostbite. The cold became another enemy to combat alongside the Germans and the barrage of bombs. Even a few minutes spent exposed outside could quickly prove deadly. Food supplies had become critically limited. The original daily ration was only 1 kr, which measured roughly in the vicinity of 2,800 calories, far below the estimated 4,000 needed to sustain the forces in such extreme cold and exertion. To stretch what little food they had, soldiers ingeniously repurposed various materials, turning discarded items into sources of warmth and sustenance. For instance, they saved the wax-coated cardboard from ration boxes, which burned slowly enough to heat water, allowing them to turn ice or snow into drinkable liquid. Technician Sergeant Donald Malarkey found, amidst the chaos and devastation, a tragic event unfolded as a Python bomb devastated a medical aid station, trapping dozens of wounded soldiers and the medical personnel tending to them. Outside the building at the moment of the blast, Corporal Kenneth Moore was stationed, and he vividly recalled hearing the sudden, deafening explosion, which prompted him to sprint immediately toward the wreckage. When he reached the site where the aid station had once stood, all that remained was a chaotic jumble of debris and rubble, with remnants of the destroyed structure. From beneath the rubble, faint voices could be distinguished, men crying out in desperation, desperately calling for their mothers or begging for help in such a horrific situation. Driven by urgent necessity and unwavering courage, the rescuers began tirelessly digging with their bare hands, constantly working through the long, dark hours of the night, painstakingly pulling out the bodies of those who had been caught beneath the collapsing debris. Among the fallen, Miss Lemaire was confirmed dead. She had made the conscious choice to remain with the wounded patients who could not be moved, displaying a powerful act of steadfast compassion and sacrifice. In that singular, tragic bombing, 30 American soldiers lost their lives, along with the beloved Belgian nurse who had, for many, come to symbolize hope and solace amid suffering. The nurse WWII, a courageous and compassionate professional from Congo who had contributed tirelessly to patient care. Remarkably, despite such devastating losses, there was a beacon of resilience. WWII survived the attack and continued attending to the wounded for an astonishing span of 30 straight hours thereafter, refusing to let the darkness of tragedy dampen her dedication. As Christmas Eve quietly gave way to Christmas Day, the esteemed Third Army, led by General Patton, found itself embroiled in challenging conditions, ravaged by a relentless blizzard that hampered progress. The offensive that had begun on December 22nd was anything but swift. In fact, it was behind schedule. The 4th Armored Division managed to advance only about 7 miles over the course of 3 days, a sluggish pace in the face of freezing temperatures and harsh snow-covered terrain. Known for his refusal to adhere to traditional military tactics, General Patton was not about to rely solely on conventional strategies to turn the tide. On December 22nd, Patton had called upon his chaplain, Colonel James O'Neill, with an unusual request. He asked for the publication of a prayer, but not merely for spiritual solace, rather explicitly for good weather to aid their hard-pressed forces. Patton felt frustrated with the dual perils faced by his soldiers. Not just the Germans' ferocity, but also the unforgiving mud, relentless floods, and brutally cold conditions that hindered their movement. His direct and unconventional approach aimed to invoke divine favor, to persuade nature itself to work in their favor. At first, Chaplain O'Neill hesitated, skeptical about the sheer improbability of such an appeal, remarking that expecting a prayer to influence the weather was akin to requesting an almost impossible miracle, a thick rug to cover such an unlikely need. Undeterred, Patton responded with boldness, affirming that he did not care how extraordinary the prayer might seem. He wanted it to be effective, whether by divine intervention or coincidentally interesting meteorological happenstance. "I want you to compose and distribute a prayer for fair weather," the general insisted. Without delay, the chaplain crafted a prayer that was printed on 250,000 small cards, which were then distributed to every soldier loyal to Patton's Third Army. This prayer read, "Almighty and most merciful Father, we humbly beseech Thee, in Thy great goodness, to restrain these immoderate rains with which we have contended. Grant us fair weather for battle, whether through divine intervention or meteorological coincidence." Remarkably, on the very morning of December 23rd, the day after the prayer had been disseminated, the weather suddenly improved beyond all expectations, revealing a sky that was crystal clear, cloudless, and bright. This dramatic change brought an unprecedented direct break in the weather pattern. After a solid week of unbreakable fog and relentless snow, visibility expanded to 10 miles, and the temperature rose above freezing for the very first time in 7 days. This unexpected change was more than mere coincidence. Most importantly, the lifting of the icy grip on the terrain enabled the Allied air forces to finally resume their critical aerial operations. Just before dawn, at 9:50 a.m., the first Pathfinder aircraft soared above Bastogne, releasing colored smoke to distinctly mark the designated drop zones below. By 11:50 a.m., the sky was filled, almost overwhelming, with the sight of an immense formation of 241 C-47 transport planes flying in near-perfect formation. Sergeant Jack Agnew, a member of the Pathfinder team, vividly remembered the moment. "We animated the zone with purple smoke, signaling the upcoming airdrop. Then suddenly we heard the low rumble, an ominous growl that intensified. During the intense combat operations at Bastogne, the logistics section of the German G4 division played a crucial role in coordinating the recovery efforts amidst the chaos of war. As the battle raged on, brave soldiers sprinted perilously through overlapping artillery fire, desperately attempting to retrieve essential supplies. I personally witnessed a poignant moment when a young American private was struck by shrapnel. He was knocked back, blood streaming down his face, yet he quickly regained his footing and, with determination etched on his face, dragged a heavily loaded bundle to the relative cover of nearby debris. His resilience under extreme circumstances was a stark reminder of the gritty determination that defined the fight. However, the Germans had not remained idle during this tumultuous day. Anti-aircraft batteries strategically positioned around Bastogne unleashed furious volleys of fire into the heavens, threatening the American aircraft above. The C-47 airplanes, tasked with delivering vital supplies, had no option but to fly at dangerously low altitudes of about 1,000 feet, maintaining a flat, unwavering course to ensure their payloads dropped accurately. As a result, they became sitting ducks for enemy fire, vulnerable to anything the German guns could unleash. By the 26th of December, aerial efforts had succeeded in deploying an impressive payload, over 1,020.7 tons of supplies via parachutes and an additional 92.4 tons through gliders. The most significant of these airlifts occurred on this date, with a fleet of 289 aircraft executing the famous Boston Run, showcasing the remarkable logistical coordination. At precisely 2:45 in the early morning of Christmas Day, German artillery concentrated their firepower for the most ferocious barrage yet on Bastogne. For a continuous span of 2 hours, shells rained down relentlessly, hammering the American defensive positions with relentless fury. Then as dawn approached, at around 5:30, a formidable assault commenced. 18 Panzer Mark V tanks of the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division, supported by infantry clad in white camouflage suited for winter operations, surged toward the western perimeter of Bastogne. Leading this aggressive attack was Lieutenant Colonel Wolfgang Mahler, under direct orders from General Kokot, who made his military directive crystal clear. Bastogne was to fall that very day. The German forces sought to fulfill the Führer's Christmas wish by capturing the strategic stronghold. The oncoming tanks crushed through the initial line of defense, which had been manned by Company A of the 127th Glider Infantry, unsettling everything in their wake. Private First Class Kenneth Hendress was positioned a little further back in the second defensive line, witnessing the earth tremble with the thunderous growl of tanks' engines as they pushed forward. In the pale light of dawn, these German machines appeared almost as mythical monsters, vast and ominous silhouettes against the sky. American soldiers tried to repel the assault with bazooka rounds, which surprisingly bounced harmlessly off the heavily armored tanks. Nevertheless, the American defenders had meticulously concealed their tank destroyers in the rubble-strewn streets, lying in wait for such an attack. The M18 Hellcat tank destroyers, belonging to the 75th Tank Destroyer Battalion, had been camouflaged in the debris of collapsed buildings, effectively hiding their positions. As the German tanks passed through, the American team unleashes of fire from the flanks proved devastating. Sergeant Bill Harper was in command of one of these Hellcats, expertly ensuring that the elements of surprise were on their side. Once the tanks had rolled by, Harper's unit pinpointed their weaker rear armor, striking with precision. His gunner, Corporal Johnson, was particularly exceptional. Within just 5 energized shots, he managed to score 3 kills, an embodiment of skill and lethal accuracy. By about 10 o'clock in the morning, all 18 of the German tanks had been reduced to smoldering wrecks on the battlefield. The bloodshed was stark. Nearly 400 German soldiers lay dead amidst the snow, their lifeless bodies stark against the white landscape. Among the prisoners captured was a German officer who, when interrogated, remarked thoughtfully, "Your defense was magnificent." The acknowledgement was a testament to the effectiveness of the American counter-strategy. From this, the German commanders concluded with certainty that Bastogne could no longer be taken that day, acknowledging the resilience and strategic proficiency of their opponents. Simultaneously, General McAuliffe addressed his troops with a heartfelt Christmas message, recounting how the Germans had issued a surrender demand during the ongoing battle. He recalled his firm, unwavering response, emphasizing that the Americans had halted every element of the enemy's assault across all fronts, north, east, south, and west, with remarkable discipline and courage. The message conveyed to his men their unbreakable spirit and the success of their defensive efforts during this critical period of combat. Later that afternoon, at exactly 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Lieutenant Charles Bogus, commanding the Sherman tank known as Cobra King of the 37th Tank Battalion, carefully peered through advance. We surged forward at maximum speed, unleashing a relentless barrage of fire from all our weapons. Private James Hendress, serving as the bow gunner aboard the Cobra King tank, vividly recounted those moments of triumphant breakthrough. Our assault sliced through the enemy-held town as effortlessly as a hot knife effortlessly cuts through butter. German soldiers, visibly panicked, fired desperately from every conceivable position, windows, doorways, and alleyways, trying to halt our advance. Our main gun, a formidable 75mm cannon, swung rapidly from side to side, its fierce shots thunderously pummeling into the battered facades of buildings, openly inflicting damage at point-blank range. At precisely 4:50 in the afternoon, Cobra King crested a small rise obscured from previous view, revealing a line of American soldiers ahead. They were members of the 326th Airborne Engineer Battalion, positioned along the outer perimeter of Bastonia's formidable defenses. Their voices boomed loudly, as if to affirm their defiant presence. "Come on in," they shouted. "You're the first tanks we've seen in 10 days. The arrival of the armor ignited a wave of hope and urgency. Bogus, our commander, quickly relayed the vital message to General Abrams via radio. Communications were re-established with our Allied forces, confirming that the siege was finally broken. However, the victory had come at a tremendously high cost. The 37th Tank Battalion had suffered the loss of 5 brave men, killed in action, 22 wounded, some gravely, and 5 servicemen unaccounted for, missing in the chaos of the breakthrough. The 53rd Armored Infantry Battalion had also lost 30 of its soldiers, with an additional 180 wounded and in need of medical aid. Despite such grievous losses, a narrow yet crucial corridor of roughly 400 yards had finally been cleared, opening a pathway into Bastogne. The news of this breakthrough spread rapidly through the besieged city, igniting wild celebrations among desperate fighters who had been conserving every precious round of ammunition for weeks. Entire clips of ammunition were discharged into the air in fervent jubilation, filling the air with acrid smoke and triumphant shouts. Wounded soldiers in the aid stations, despite their pain and suffering, cheered with exuberance at the sight of the breaking siege. The atmosphere was tense, but undeniably victorious. Standing firm amidst the chaos, General McAuliffe maintained his typical composure, offering words of cautious optimism. "We're glad to see you, boys." Yet in the minds of the German commanders, the psychological effects were far more damaging than any physical defeat. Major General Kokot documented his calculations in his diary, lamenting, "The relief of Bastogne is a catastrophe, not just tactically, but also morally." He understood that his troops' morale had been shattered. They had seen firsthand the unwavering resolve and fighting spirit of the Americans. As a result, their collective belief in victory had been deeply diminished. "Our soldiers no longer believe we can win," Kokot wrote soberly. "They have witnessed American determination, and it has broken their spirit." In more blunt and brutal terms, Oberstleutnant Kaufmann from the Panzer Division voiced his frustration. "We threw everything we had at Bastogne, our finest troops, our most desperate reserves of tanks and ammunition. And yet, despite all that effort, they held firm. When we demanded surrender, they simply mocked us." His voice echoed the frustration and bitterness felt by many German commanders. Perhaps the most telling blow to German morale came in the form of a succinct, defiant reply, the single devastating word, "nuts." That simple phrase did more symbolic damage to their mental state than a multitude of bombs raining down. The defenders of Bastogne initially relied on a force of approximately 18,000 men. By December 26th, the grim toll of casualties administered from December 19th to January 6th amounted to 341 soldiers killed, 1,691 wounded, and 516 listed as missing. The fierce fighting had exacted a heavy price across all units. Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division suffered roughly 500 casualties, a staggering figure that underscored the ferocity of the battle. Meanwhile, the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion had managed to destroy 108 German armored vehicles, while suffering the loss of only 17 Greyhounds in return. German losses around Bastogne were catastrophic by any standard. The 26th Volksgrenadier Division registered over 60% of its personnel casualties, which vividly highlighted the destructive intensity of the American assault. The Panzer Division's lair lost a total of 42 tanks in the fighting, an irreplaceable blow to their armored strength. The 2nd Panzer Division, which had circumvented Bastogne by heading toward the Moose River, faced its obliteration when it ran out of fuel just 4 miles away from the riverbank. Consequently, the battlefield was often transformed into what troops referred to as tank plinking, a striking term capturing the relentless nature of their attacks. The German forces were notably lacking in air cover, leaving them exposed to the precision and power of Allied air assaults. Our strategy involved airborne attacks from high altitudes. Specifically, our aircraft would reach elevation of around 8,000 feet before gracefully diving downward. As we descended, we would release our rockets at approximately 2,000 feet, then swiftly ascend back to safer altitudes, avoiding any potential anti-aircraft fire. Beneath us, the German military vehicles and their installations would ignite in fiery explosions, creating extensive infernal landscapes that stretched for miles around, an overt demonstration of the destruction we wrought. Among the most impactful raids occurred in the wintry days of December, precisely on the 26th. On that day, a formidable force of nearly 324 RAF Lancaster bombers executed a meticulously coordinated attack on German defenses encircling a critical strategic point known as Bastogne. During this assault, they unleashed a staggering total of over 1,140 tons of high-explosive bombs. The intensity of this bombardment rendered every road within approximately 3 kilometers utterly impassable, effectively paralyzing any German mobility within that radius and contributing heavily to the eventual breach of their defenses. Remarkably, not everyone perished in the chaos. A German officer named Unteroffizier Hans Barons, serving with the 18th Volksgrenadier Division, managed through sheer luck or resilience to survive the annihilation. As the earth itself convulsed beneath the bombs, buildings erupted into dust and debris, collapsing in on themselves. Men simply vanished in the blink of an eye, disintegrating into vaporized remains in amassing masses of inferno and smoke. When the stratagem finally exhausted its fury, I emerged from my fortified position, the shelter I had huddled in, and was met with a bleak, moonscape-like terrain. The landscape bore the scars of devastation directly from the bombing. In the aftermath of such intense assaults, a prominent leader of the Allied side, General McAuliffe, sent a clear message of commendation directed towards the 21st Tactical Air Command. He acknowledged with admiration how essential their cooperation had been for the defenders to maintain their positions, implying that without their exceptional support, the resistance would have crumbled. Throughout this intense phase of the siege, something extraordinary had been unfolding insidiously within the German ranks, an unsettling psychological transformation that in the days to come after the war, Allied intelligence sources would fully comprehend. Initially, the Germans had entered this confrontation conscious of propaganda and forged stereotypes, that American soldiers were untrained, spoiled brats who would retreat at the first serious challenge, revealing weakness and lack of resolve. However, the bloody reality they encountered at Bastogne shattered these pretenses in devastating fashion. Georg Wilhelm Hoffmann, a soldier of the 26th Volksgrenadier Division, wrote a harrowing letter to his wife on Christmas Eve. That letter was recovered later from his body, an eerie testament to the intense encounters that day. Hoffmann's words vividly expressed his disillusionment. The Americans are not what we were told. In fact, they fought with ferocity comparable to that of devils, seemingly unfazed by danger. He recounted witnessing a single American machine gun crew hold off an entire German company for 3 hours. Such events saddened and humbled German officers and soldiers alike, forcing them to reassess their assumptions about American combatants. Likewise, Major Jan Krag of the Panzer Lehr Division was captured on December the 27th. During his interrogation, Cragg delivered an unexpectedly dignified and profound assessment, asserting that victory was not merely the result of greater numbers or better weapons. Instead, he emphasized that it was those soldiers' fierce spirit, the indomitable will and fighting bravery, that truly tipped the scales. "It's not just about the force of arms," he declared, "but about spirit." Cragg's words resonated with the ongoing realization that American soldiers had developed into real warriors, brave, resilient, tasked with defending principles worth fighting for. At Bastogne, while the headlines gleamed across newspapers worldwide about the stout defense, an even more impressive victory was unfolding, namely a revolutionary shift in how warfare was conceptualized and executed. What transpired during Patton's relief operation was nothing short of extraordinary. A veritable revolution in operational warfare, distinct from the kind of slow, attritional combat that had characterized previous campaigns. The quantities involved in this logistical feat were almost incomprehensible, measured in the staggering scope of effort and coordination. Over the span of just 72 hours, General Patton's Third Army successfully transported approximately 250,000 men, an immense force, across what was effectively over 100 miles of icy, treacherous roads. Not only that, but this massive movement involved more than 133,000 vehicles, which were repositioned and redistributed without a single major congestion or during a period of intense combat. A staggering total of 167 military operations were carried out over a span of just 10 days, many of which were conducted under extraordinarily harsh conditions that lacked proper anesthetic support. At times, the soldiers performed their procedures by flickering candlelight, a consequence of power failures when their electrical generators faltered, transforming what should have been sterile environments into makeshift operating theaters. In a remarkable act of resourcefulness in extricating moments of hope amid despair, Belgian cognac was used as a substitute in place of morphine after the supply had been depleted, offering some relief to the suffering wounded. Among those risking their lives to save others was Technical Sergeant Eugene Rowe of Easy Company, a man who tirelessly treated over 200 wounded soldiers during the intense siege. His relentless dedication often mandated crawling through artillery bombardments, risking his life repeatedly just to reach the casualties who needed his help most. Despite the chaos surrounding him, Eugene Rowe never carried a weapon. His only equipment was a battered medical kit, exemplifying his unwavering commitment to saving lives at any cost. The extraordinary defense of Bastogne and the heroism demonstrated during Patton's strategic relief operation had profound consequences that extended well beyond the immediate military victory on the battlefield. That pivotal engagement halted Hitler's grand offensive designed to divide the Allied forces and recapture the vital port of Antwerp. This offensive, which aimed to split the Allied line and force a strategic retreat, was ultimately stopped cold, leading to significant implications for the course of the war. According to Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, the most senior German military commander operating in Western Europe, the Battle of Bastogne represented the demise of what the Germans termed the Ardennes Offensive. In post-war sessions, he candidly admitted that the Germans had desperately needed the strategic road junction there by December the 18th, intending it as a critical supply and movement hub. When the German forces managed to hold off the Allied attack for nearly a week, only to be reinforced by superior numbers, it became clear that the German offensive had failed spectacularly. This failure came after Hitler and his military planners committed their entire strategic reserve, comprising 25 divisions, to this offensive within just 6 weeks of relentless fighting. The Germans suffered devastating losses, between 81,000 and 98,000 soldiers killed, wounded, or missing. They also lost more than 600 tanks and assault guns and 1,000 aircraft, losses that Germany could never realistically replenish. Conversely, the Americans also sustained heavy casualties, around 75,000 in total, including those killed, wounded, or unaccounted for, with nearly 19,000 soldiers losing their lives. While these American casualties were severe by any measure, the United States possessed the capacity and industrial strength to replace its losses. By the beginning of January in the year 1945, American military authorities were dispatching fresh divisions to Europe at an unprecedented pace, with about one brigade arriving from the United States every week. Even more critically, the fierce and prolonged engagement of the Battle of Bastogne had exhausted Germany's last reserves. When the Soviet Red Army launched their bid for victory across the Eastern Front, an aggressive winter offensive beginning on January the 12th, the Germans found themselves devoid of the strategic reserves needed to reinforce their positions to the east. Consequently, the path toward Berlin, the ultimate objective of Hitler's Eastern campaign, was effectively left unguarded, opening the door for the final push that would lead to the fall of the capital and hasten the end of the war in Europe. The Battle of Bastogne left an enduring legacy that resounds to this day. The brave stand made their earned legendary status. McAuliffe's famously defiant "nuts" reply entered the annals of American military folklore, symbolizing unwavering resolve in the face of overwhelming odds. The daring relief march led by General Patton and his armored columns became a textbook example studied by military academies around the world, illustrating tactics of timely intervention and tactical ingenuity. To commemorate the 40th anniversary of that heroic stand in December of 1984, veterans from both sides of the conflict gathered once more in Bastogne, forging a moment of reconciliation that transcended former hostilities. These former enemies met in friendship, sharing stories and reflections on what they believed to be their roles in the great tapestry of history. During this memorial gathering, General McAuliffe, then in his late 80s, addressed his audience, emphasizing that their fight had been motivated not by a desire for conquest, but by a fundamental pursuit of freedom. He shared that their efforts had been driven by duty rather than hatred, and that after the war, they worked together to restore what the violence had ravaged. Among those returning for the anniversary was Hans Detmer from the 2nd Volksgrenadier Division, a former German soldier. Reflecting on his journey, he said, "I came here as a conqueror in 1944, but I return as a friend today. The Americans we faced taught us the true meaning of democracy, not as weakness, but as an enduring strength." Long before his passing, Tanya was honored in a special and lasting way by the town he cherished. The local brewery, seeking to commemorate his enduring legacy, crafted a unique airborne beer in his memory, symbolizing the spirit and airborne courage he exemplified. When he visited again in the year 2019, at the ripe age of 96, he gleaned a moment of joy and reflection to raise a glass, bidding a heartfelt toast that resonated with those present. To the boys who didn't come home, to the people who never forgot, to freedom. His words echoed beyond that moment, embodying the profound gratitude and enduring sacrifice that defined an entire generation. The final reports on the Bastogne operation, in retrospect, remain staggering, revealing a series of remarkable achievements and sacrifices that continue to inspire. The initial American military presence in Bastogne was sizable, comprising approximately 18,000 troops. Among these, more than 11,800 served within the 101st Airborne Division, renowned for their bravery and resilience under fire. During the intense combat involved in the siege, Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division fielded around 40 operational tanks, illustrative of the formidable aerial and armored coordination on display. In terms of human cost, American casualties in the Bastogne campaign amounted to roughly 4,500 soldiers, an enormous sacrifice demanding unyielding resilience. The German forces committed to Bastogne initially numbered approximately 25,000 to 30,000 soldiers, but expanded over time as reinforcements arrived, eventually swelling to roughly 55,000 troops. Their casualties after months of fierce fighting amidst bitter winter conditions exceeded 15,000 losses, and they suffered the destruction of over 100 tanks, a testament to American endurance and strategic ingenuity. In securing Bastogne, the American Relief Force, commanded by General George S. Patton, was a massive contingent, numbering about 250,000 men. Their rapid maneuver, pivoting northwards, is regarded as one of the most audacious and successful military operations of the war. More than 133,000 vehicles across an impressive fleet moved to relieve the besieged city. In less than a week, under freezing winter skies where the temperature plummeted to around 10 degrees Fahrenheit, these troops advanced over 80 miles amidst low visibility and extreme weather, Conquering those obstacles, they realized victory in only 5 days of relentless pursuit and combat. Support reconnaissance and logistics relied heavily on daring air operations. Over 1,200 tons of supplies were airborne delivered into Bastogne, utilizing a fleet of more than 961 C-47 aircraft sorties. On December 23rd alone, more than 100 aircraft participated in critical resupply missions, bravely confronting treacherous weather conditions, with less than 100 yards of visibility between December 19th and 22nd. Yet despite severe cold and storm-ravaged skies, an astounding 95% of all airborne supplies were successfully recovered and delivered, showcasing extraordinary logistical proficiency. Weather data collected indicates a continuous, brutal stretch of 168 hours, 7 days below freezing temperatures, with consistent freezing cold and snow, making the achievement even more remarkable. When clear skies finally emerged on December 23rd, the newfound visibility marked a turning point in the operation. The significance of Bastogne's resilience and victory resonated far beyond the battlefield's immediate circle. In January of 1945, Winston Churchill, speaking passionately to Britain's Parliament, boldly declared, "This is undoubtedly the greatest American battle of the war, and I believe it will forever be regarded as one of the most glorious American victories in military history." Recognizing the valor and strategic mastership involved, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery heartily concurred, acknowledging that the Americans at Bastogne wrote a chapter in history that will be remembered as one of the finest, demonstrating unparalleled courage and determination. Their stand will inspire generations as long as the principles of bravery and patriotism are honored. Perhaps most touching was a tribute from a former German general, Heinrich von Luttwitz, who, commanding the 47th Panzer Corps that initially encircled Bastogne, nonetheless recognized the heroism of the defenders. Visiting the memorial in 1954, he saluted with genuine respect, recalling with admiration, "They were magnificent enemies, adversaries who grew into even better friends, fighting not to satisfy conquest, but out of a principled resolve. That is why, in the end, they deserve to emerge victorious." This humility and mutual respect symbolized the profound lesson learned by the defeated forces during those frigid winter days of 1944, that the strength of free men fighting side by side outmatches overwhelming numbers in every respect. The lessons from Bastogne taught a timeless truth: determined defiance, unwavering resolve, and a united stand for liberty in the face of tyranny are forces impossible to overcome. The experience underscored that self-determination and the collective fight for democracy can generate a resilience that no oppressive army or conqueror can suppress. When democracy is pushed to its breaking point, it responds that indefinable quality, firmness of purpose and unwavering resolve, truly embodied the spirit of Bastogne. It was this resilient essence that sustained the defenders, standing tall against oppression and tyranny. It was this resilient spirit that spurred General Patton's armored divisions to thunder across snow-laden fields with unstoppable force, their tanks carving paths through the icy terrain in a show of relentless determination. And when the critical moment arrived, when the very future of liberty was delicately balanced on the edge of victory or defeat, those brave souls responded with a single word, a word that would resonate beyond the battlefield, echoing through history and eternity: nuts. This simple yet fiercely defiant remark was a perfect emblem of their courage, a declaration that they would never surrender or give in, no matter the odds stacked against them. As the German soldiers' taunts and derision faded away in the cold snows enveloping Bastogne, they were overtaken by the overwhelming might of the Allied advance. The loud thunder of Patton's tanks echoed relentlessly, their mechanical roars piercing the brutal silence of winter's grip. Around the besieged paratroopers, who had refused to lay down their arms despite being surrounded, a spirit of indomitable resilience grew stronger, unbowed and unbreakable. What had once been defiance gradually transformed into a sincere respect among allies, which then deepened into genuine admiration, fueled by shared danger and collective perseverance. Over time, this mutual acknowledgement matured into genuine friendship, the bonds forged amid hardship and tumult. The fortress of democracy, battered yet unbowed, had withstood the assault. The arsenal of freedom, its defenders, had emerged victorious in that pivotal moment. Their unwavering resolve secured the future of a free world and preserved the principles of liberty and sovereignty for generations to come. In this triumph, history was inscribed not just as a victory of armed might, but as a testament to the unyielding spirit of those who refused to surrender to tyranny, ensuring that the ideals of freedom would endure long after the echoes of war had faded.